Justin Kinner, Kev Nash, back with you here on Dayton's ESPN radio station, 1410 Wing AM. College football season. It's not here yet, but it's not too far off in the distance. Kev makes fun of me because I like NFL preseason football. I'll take any football talk we could get at this point. But Phil Steele, Phil Steele's College Football Preview magazine for the 2023 season is officially out, and it's just wall-to-wall, cover-to-cover information for every team you can imagine. And he's joining us now, Mr. Phil Steele. Welcome, sir. How are you?
I am doing great. How about you gentlemen this afternoon?
Pretty good. We're going to just jump into it. This is my first question for you, man. We already know recruiting is the lifeblood of college football, of all college sports. But the transfer portal, what are some guys that are in the transfer portal on new teams that are going to make those big splash plays?
Yeah, and the transfer portal sure has changed the way things are done in college football and changed the way things are done, I think, overall, especially for my magazine. We had to go out, push it to our release date. We don't send the final page of the press until June 7th, 3 full weeks after the transfer portal closes. Now, we used to be able to go to the press sometime in May, like those other magazines do. Puts us out a little bit later, but I think it definitely gives us an advantage. Now, as far as some key transfers, the biggest one, I think, is going to be Sam Hartman at Notre Dame. Because if you go back to Notre Dame last year, they had their quarterback in Buckner. He got injured, and they were basically playing with a backup quarterback all year in Drew Pine. Well, now they go from having a backup quarterback to one of the best quarterbacks out there in Sam Hartman. Hartman had a fantastic career at Wake Forest and steps into a team that's loaded in every position except quarterback. I mean, running backs, very deep. In fact, they moved Chris Tyree to slot back. The offensive line, one of the best in the country. The defense, across the board, one of the best in the country with my number 18 set of linebackers, number 7 linebackers, number 9 DBs. The special teams, number 6 in the country. The only thing they were missing was a quarterback. They bring one in Sam Hartman. I think that's huge. And staying on the quarterback realm, let's go to Iowa. I know the second that Cade McNamara entered the portal I looked at the note, McNamara's in the portal. I'm like, go to Iowa. That'd be your best fit. Mm-hmm. Guess what? He ended up at Iowa, and not only went to Iowa, a team that can use a game manager like himself, but also he brought his tight end with him, and Eric All. And as you know, at Iowa, they've had some pretty special tight ends. So I think McNamara and All vastly upgrade that offense. And while folks say, oh, it's Iowa's stodgy offense, they can't win with it, they only averaged 17 points per game last season. Hey, just 2 years ago, this exact same offense averaged 31.8 points per game, 369 yards per game. I think they'll be back to that level. They've got one of the best defenses. They've got one of the best special teams, and they're more experienced than last year. I think that makes Iowa a legitimate contender in the Big Ten, as does missing both Ohio State and Michigan, 2 teams they had to play last year.
Speaking of the Big Ten, what do you think about Luke Fickell in Wisconsin?
I was wondering at the start, because you brought in an offensive coordinator and Phil Longo who likes to throw the football, and I was very skeptical to begin with. I was like, well, Wisconsin's strength is the run game, is the running backs and the offensive line and the defense, and now they're going to throw the football around the yard. I don't know if that's going to work. But after talking to Coach Fickell, they're not just going to abandon the run. In fact, he feels that going with more passing with Mordecai and the pass game is going to open up holes for Braylon Allen and Ches Malusi, and that they're actually going to be more effective than they were last year. They still have the big offensive line, and defensively last year they only had 3 returning starters on defense. This year they have 8 returning starters on the defensive side of the ball, and they've got a great schedule. You look at their road games, it's against Washington State, Purdue, Illinois, Indiana, and Minnesota. All of those games fall into the winnable category. Now, their 2 toughest games, they play that Iowa team I talked about at home, and they also play Ohio State at home. And another benefit to that, they get Ohio State the week after the Buckeyes play Penn State at home in a big game. So I think Wisconsin has a chance to be that surprise team this year. In fact, they are my number 1 surprise team in the country, which is a non-top 10 team that I think has a shot at making the playoff.
We got Phil Steele with us here. The Phil Steele College Football Preview Magazine is out for the upcoming 2023 season. Obviously, quarterbacks, that's always the main talking point for all teams, and you could always kind of decipher the success meter for a team heading into a year based on the talent level of the quarterback. Talking Big Ten, you mentioned Ohio State. They're a fascinating tale heading into the season because they have every talented skill player that you can imagine, obviously with Marvin Harrison Jr. And Ibuka, at wide receiver, and there's so many pass catching weapons that the Buckeyes have. Obviously, it's Ohio State. That's the premier program in the Big Ten, but you're only as good as your quarterback. How did you evaluate Ohio State with all the running backs, with the offensive line, with all the wide receivers, with all the talent that they have? Phil, how did you decipher, your preview for Ohio State, considering the wild card that is the quarterback with Kyle McCord most likely?
I think you have to go back and take a look at the history of Ohio State. And in the last 10 years, Ohio State's had numerous first-year starting quarterbacks, guys that haven't started before. And yet, Ohio State at the end of the year has had the top quarterback in the Big Ten 9 of the 10 years. So Kyle McCord is going to have a big-time season. I mean, look at the receiving core he's throwing to. You talked about it with Harrison, Ibuka, Fleming, Stover, and company. They have my number one set of receivers in the country. They've got a very solid offensive line, running backs. I think at the end of the year, Kyle McCord's a Heisman contender, much like many of those first-year Buckeye quarterbacks are. In fact, I've got Ohio State, even with the inexperience at quarterback, rated as the number 2 most talented team in the country.
I had said the same thing about Kyle McCord, but so many question marks about him. I'm like, if we're going to say that Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be the best wide receiver in college football this upcoming season, of course, talent-wise, yes, but matched with the statistical backing, he can't be the best wide receiver in college football this upcoming season unless Kyle McCord has a Heisman finalist type season. So I agree with you. I've been predicting that there's, based on history, recent history, it's been a long time since Ohio State's had a quarterback come in that did not live up to the hype. We have no reason to not trust that Ryan Day's offense with Kyle McCord and all these weapons, that it's not going to work out. So it's nice to hear you kind of, reiterate some of the points I've made too about Kyle McCord. I think he's going to be a Heisman finalist by the end of the year. There's no way you can't be unless you're a complete bust, and it's going to be very hard to be that when you have so many weapons around him.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% there, Justin. So, great minds think alike, huh?
Yeah, there we go.
You can't talk Ohio State without talking about that team up north, Michigan. They beat the Buckeyes 2 years in a row. They went to the playoff 2 years in a row. What are your expectations for the Wolverines?
This is probably the best team Jim Harbaugh's put on the field.
No,
J.J. McCarthy gives you an experienced quarterback. They got Blake Corum back at running back. Offensive line's been the Joe Moore Award winner the last 2 years, trying for 3 in a row. They've added some great transfers there. Defensively, they're extremely tough. Plus, of the big 3 in the Big East, I'm talking Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, which everybody will have as the top 3. All 3 will be in the top 10 at the start of the year. Michigan's got the best schedule. I mean, Ohio State has to play not only Michigan on the road, they also have to play Wisconsin on the road and Notre Dame on the road. So those are 3 tough road tests. Michigan's got 1 tough road test at Penn State. They do get Ohio State at home, which is key. And, of course, they've got that soft non-conference schedule. And then when you look at Penn State, they have to play Ohio State on the road. They also have to play Illinois on the road, which is going to be rather difficult. So I think of the top 3 teams in the Big Ten East, Michigan's got the best schedule.
Phil, I wanted to bounce around back to transfer portal. Everything that Coach Prime has done out there in Colorado, he's stacked that roster with a lot of transfers. What are his expectations for the Buffs?
I think it's going to be a year or 2 from really turning into a team. I think that's pretty tough. In fact, I talked to 11 of the 12 coaches in the Pac-12 this year. The only one I didn't talk to was Coach Sanders, and one of the reasons would be he was still signing his team as I was closing out my coaching process, so we wouldn't have much to talk about. He would say, well, we got a couple guys coming in. I do like the talent they brought in at each of the positions. There's no doubt, I would say athletically, this team is an upgrade to last year. But, of course, last year Colorado was just a 1-11 team. So how much upgraded from 1-11, and how quickly can this unit of talented players transform into a team? Plus, they're playing in a very difficult Pac-12, which has 6 legitimate top 25 teams. I think it's going to be a rebuilding year for Colorado.
Phil, with that, with the Pac-12, it's a very interesting year that we're heading into. It's kind of like the last season of college football as we know it before all of the the conference realignment really kicks in with Texas, Oklahoma going to the SEC, obviously with USC and UCLA going to the Big Ten. Who knows what the future of the Pac-12 is and everything along those lines. But with that to the side, just this upcoming season alone, the Pac-12 is fascinating because watching, USC, who's been a solid program for so long, kind of reemerge now with the job that Lincoln Riley's done. That's the favorite to come out of the Pac-12, correct? Is that your vibe based on your rankings in the magazine?
Yeah, I've got USC winning it. I think there are 6 teams capable of winning it, which would be any of the big 6, what I call them out there, which is USC, Utah, Oregon, Washington, and Oregon State, and and UCLA. But with USC, probably the biggest difference from last year to this year is what Lincoln Riley's done with the defense. When I talked to Coach Riley going over the team with them, he brought in a lot of transfers on the defensive side of the ball. In fact, I have 6 guys listed defensively that are transfers, like Bear Alexander coming in from Georgia, one of the top defensive linemen in the country while at Georgia, but he was playing behind some very talented players. He'll be the star here. He's got Bars coming in from Arizona, who was a highly productive player with 9 sacks last year. Guys all the way across the board. Mason Cobb coming in from Ohio State. And offensively, they've got Caleb Williams back. They've got dangerous receivers, a solid offensive line. The only games I've got USC an underdog in all year are a slight underdog to Notre Dame, a slight underdog to Oregon. I think the Pac-12 probably beats itself up as far as having a playoff contender, but if there is one, it's USC this year.
Now, you sound, I mean, from the beginning of our conversation today to now, I mean, you're very high on Notre Dame, it sounds like. You said slightly favored over USC. What's your perception of that matchup? For us being big Buckeye fans here in the Buckeye State, Ohio State, Notre Dame. Ohio State has to go on the road early in the season as they're trying to, Kyle McCord getting adjusted to being the full-time starter. What is your vibe about that matchup? You're saying Notre Dame slight favorite over USC. Are you getting that same vibe for Notre Dame and Ohio State?
I've got that game rated a toss-up. I can tell you right now in Vegas, Ohio State's an 8.5-point favorite. But if you watch last year's game, and you're at the end of the third quarter, this was a very young Notre Dame team making a road start with a young quarterback, and they pretty much played Ohio State even up. The Buckeyes ended up winning by 11, but it was a tough game for the Buckeyes. Now this year, Ohio State's got the young quarterback making his first legitimate road start because, the Indiana game will have a crowd, but Ohio State fans will be there. Ohio State fans will be there at Notre Dame, but there will still be a pretty loud Notre Dame contingent at home in South Bend. They've got the defense. They're a complete team. They now have the quarterback. I do rate that game a toss-up, especially with the young quarterback make his first legitimate road start.
Ohio State's making a quarterback change like you just talked about. So is Georgia, and so is Alabama. What do we expect for the guys down south?
With Georgia, they're in a perfect situation here because each of their units rank in my top units. The only question mark is quarterback, but then look at their schedule. They're going to be a double-digit favorite in their first 10 games. They've got a quarterback in Carson Beck who's been in the system now for 3 years. He's an athletic upgrade over Stetson Bennett, and he's going to have 10 starts under his belt by the time he gets to a tough road game, which is at Tennessee on November the 18th. And by that time, he'll be an experienced quarterback. So I've got Georgia clearly favored in all 12 games this year. I think they have a great shot at three-peating for the first time since the 1930s when the Minnesota Golden Gophers did. As far as Alabama goes, this is when Nick Saban's most dangerous. I mean, he's only won 1 national title when they've been the preseason number 1 team. They've been the preseason number 1 team the last 2 years. This year, they're not. So that's usually when they're under the radar. They've got 3 capable quarterbacks. I talked about Tyler Buckner before, who was the original starter at Notre Dame. They also have Jalen Milroe and Ty Simpson. All their units just loaded in talent. Every year they lose a ton of guys to the NFL, and the replacements turn out to be just as good. Toughest game of the season for them is at Texas A&M. I rate that one a toss-up, but they get Texas at home. They get LSU at home. I think Alabama's got a real good shot at getting back to the SEC title game after that horrible season last year where they went 11-2 and had 1 and 3-point losses last year. I don't know what's going on with Alabama.
Phil, obviously I'm a Buckeye through and through, but another team that I follow in college football that I really like is Florida State. Last year, they finally bounced back, got to 10 wins in that bowl game victory over Oklahoma. They have Jordan Travis returning. They've been crazy good in the transfer portal. What do you expect from the Seminoles this year?
Well, what a difference a year makes, huh, Kev?
Yeah.
Because last year at this time, you've got Mike Norvell on the hot seat coming off 3-6 and 5-7 seasons. And last year, they were in my mind, the best team in the ACC last year. I mean, you look at my power ratings, the average game grade. They had 3 tough, close losses, but they outgained opponents by 165 yards per game in conference play. This year, 7 of their units rank in my top 15 in the front of the magazine. They not only have 17 returning starters, they get some excellent transfers coming in. It's a very dangerous Florida State team. Now, they're going to be the preseason pick to win the ACC. I actually went with Clemson to win the ACC because they get the game against Florida State in Death Valley, which I think is huge. And when I was talking to Coach Sweeney, going over the team with them, he made an interesting comment. Remember that 2018 defense they had, defensive line, I should say, loaded with first-round draft picks? He said this group doesn't have the star power of that 18 group, but they're deeper in talent and experience. And that makes them scary, especially with Cade Klubnik at the quarterback spot. This is a very dangerous Clemson team that gets their toughest 2 games, Florida State and Notre Dame, both at home.
All right, Phil Steele, awesome enough to take some time and hang out with us today. Kinner and Kev, 1410 Wing AM. Phil Steele's College Football Preview Magazine is officially out. 2 locations you can get this, correct? Barnes & Noble and Books A Million, correct?
Yeah, Barnes & Noble and Books A Million, and they're the only places this year. Normally we're out there at your Walmarts and Kroger's and things like that, but Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. You can also go to philsteele.com, and when you order it at philsteele.com, we do charge you a shipping charge. It costs money to ship things, but we give you the digital version absolutely free at philsteele.com. And one note for you guys, being there in Dayton, we're actually having an FCS digital magazine up and available in about 2 weeks. And we give you 2 full pages on every FCS team. So if you are a Dayton Flyer fan, you love FCS football, we'll have it for you. It'll be the only place in the country you get 2 full pages on every FCS team.
What about flag football and high school football? I mean, you seem to you don't like not being busy, do you, sir?
Yeah, I'm not able to cover the high school football or flag football, just way too much. But we will be doing the FCS this year, which has me excited because I love watching the FCS games.
Very cool. Phil, last thing on the way out. It's the last year of the college football playoff being set at 4 teams. Who are your 4? I mean, are we going to see Quinn Ewers in Texas finally, kind of leave the Big 12 a parting gift and say, hey, we got you another playoff team here? I mean, what's your outlook for the 14 playoff, the final year of the 14 playoff?
Yeah, they clearly have that opportunity, but I didn't go with Texas because many years they have disappointed, but I do think they've got the best chance of the Big 12. But my top 4 this year, going way out on a limb with number 1, which is Georgia, trying for their 3-peat this year. But number 2, I did go out on a limb with Clemson because a lot of places that I looked at in the preseason didn't even have Clemson in their top 10. I've got them number 2 in the country for the reasons I spelled out. I think they'll be favored in every single game. Number 3, I went with Michigan. I know it's tough here in Ohio State. I've got Ohio State number 2 on my power poll, but Michigan's got the best schedule in the East. They get Ohio State at home. And then number 4, Alabama. And, of course, I've got the Buckeyes number 5 just outside.
Ooh, that's a nice parting gift for us. I mean, good for you. There you go. Hey, this is why it's the last year of the 14 playoff. It's going to be completely different for you next year, right? Is it going to be so much tougher? I mean, when you got Texas, Oklahoma in the SEC, USC coming to the Big 10, it's going to make your job even more fun, I'm assuming, just trying to assess these super deep conferences with all these talented teams. It's going to make your job tougher to rank these, I'm sure.
Yeah, probably a little bit. And then the one thing is, I think it's going to make it where teams can afford to lose a game or 2 and still make the playoff. Whereas right now, maybe 1 loss and you're out.
Yep. With
the 12-team playoff, I think it might de-emphasize the regular season a little bit because you can afford to lose a game or 2. And a team like Ohio State, if they go 10-2 or 11-1, they're going to make the playoff each and every year.
All right, Phil Steele. Phil Steele's College Football Preview Magazine available. Barnes & Noble and Books A Million, of course, and we'll continue to push the website where people can go and purchase, make that purchase as well. Phil, thank you so much, sir. We appreciate your time today.
Hey, a lot of fun talking football with you guys today. Always enjoy it. Thanks for having me on.
Listen, stream, watch. It's the Justin Kinner Show with Kev Nash right here on Dayton's ESPN Radio, 1410 Wing AM.